Imagine you decide to take a nostalgic trip and revisit all of your favorite childhood websites. And so you open up your laptop, you type in clubpenguin.com, and then you click search, only to be met with an innocent penguin dead on the screen with "Rest in Peace" written above his head. Club Penguin is dead.
In the arms of the angel.
Build-A-Bearville, it's gone. Pop Tropica, unalived and replaced by his shitty clone. Pepsi World, deceased. Webkins, resuscitated from the brink of death and just barely breathing. In conclusion, it's a total massacre. 100% everything is ruined. After about a half-hour meltdown, the reality finally starts to set in. Every single piece of your digital childhood is gone, completely wiped from the face of the internet. Discovering an old childhood website has basically disappeared. Unfortunately, everybody from the early 2000s has experienced at one point or another. It's literally a canon event. You can't escape it. To precisely define what a children's internet space is, in short, it's a website that's created for, focused on, and ultimately consumed by children. I'm not talking about content that can be found on a social media platform. I am talking about where the entire website is made specifically for kids. On social media platforms, kids' content is just one out of a whole different catalog of different things. I am talking about centered entirely around the children. Even if there are some teenagers or some adults within the community that play the game, you can still clearly tell that the atmosphere caters towards children first and foremost. I'm not talking about teenagers. In this video, I'll be referring to children as people under 13. The most common example of kids' online spaces are the browser games, where the core objective involves some sort of play. This can be gameplay, exploration, role play. Even the chat rooms and all of the messaging stuff are placed within the game as an element of the game. Some examples of this are like Neopets, Club Penguin, Pixie Hollow, etc. Companies that had a lot of children customers also used to make alternate versions of their standard websites for the kids to visit, such as Pepsi World. The designs of these alternate websites were very juvenile and fun and just unserious. They had all of these small games that visitors of the website could play. Most of the children's cable television channels like Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, Disney Channel all had kids versions of their standard websites. Another type of these online spaces is the ones that are educational, like the original ABC Mouse and PBS Kids website. The Web 1.0 had these different communities everywhere. The Web 1.0 was a period of time on the World Wide Web before the current social media giants that we all know today had completely taken over the cyberspace. Although technically the Web 1.0 was from the 90s all the way up until the launch of Facebook in 2004, it doesn't truly end until 2009 when Facebook actually blew up. These digital playgrounds totally exploded throughout the mid to late 2000s. Platforms like Nicktropolis saw huge peaks in user traffic during this time. According to The Guardian, Webkins found an 11-fold growth in market share within the first 4 months of 2005, and the most iconic games we all know today were launched throughout this decade. The popularity of this industry grew every single year throughout the 2000s, reaching its peak in about 2010, and it's been trending downhill ever since then. In 2026, there is not the adequate community, the environment, nor the enrichment made specifically for the present-day youth. The youth of nowadays are just left with nothing but social media and general internet spaces, which has risks of negative effects if they consume it too early on. This is happening because of two main changes. The kids don't use these spaces anymore, and the adults are not prioritizing preserving them anymore. All of the websites that kids once used to congregate at are declining in users, and they're slowly going extinct. Virtually every single popular site within this ecosystem has been declining in Google search trends for years at this point. Since the 2010s, the children's digital landscape has been subject to a barrage of shutdowns, bankruptcy, tech obsolescence, user abandonment, and a whole lot of other additional issues. Even when there's a canceled game that has a fan legacy remake, a lot of times they're unofficial and they get quickly removed for copyright, which makes them unreliable for long-term preservation. So what exactly is causing these pieces of the internet to be pushed out and thrown away? Why exactly do kids no longer use them and adults are shutting them down? First, there's the declining user base. Children have migrated along with adults to online entertainment through social media. Some figures estimate around 38% of all internet time is spent on social media. A lot of other figures estimate that it's closer to 35%, but it's around the 30% mark. One report says that social media accounts for 4 trillion of the 12 trillion hours Americans spend online every single year. A survey on Science Direct of over 10,000 kids under the age of 13 found 63% of them are on social media, with an average of 3.38 different accounts per child. The incredible user friendliness of modern day social media is a big part of the reason why it's contributed to to this massive success. Simple navigation, big buttons, simplistic visuals, clean UI, interactive, smoother technology that doesn't crash. In addition to this visionary ease of consumption, the variety and just the scale of the content that's available on social media, it just totally surpasses anything that's available on any sort of browser game. Over 95 million photos and videos are uploaded to Instagram every single day. 200 billion tweets are made every single year. In total, YouTube holds a catalog of 5.1 billion videos. So the entertainment value that a restaurant simulator game is going to have to kids, it just pales in comparison to the entertainment value of Instagram's entire catalog. I also want to talk about this new attitude that is being adopted. Social media has become the default, ending the web's formerly decentralized nature. Users automatically join because that is where everybody else is. That is the place to go.
You didn't have the 5 major social media sites that everyone just used. When people get onto the internet nowadays, all of them are probably going to go to the most pre-established, understood places that you go to on the internet because everyone is on there, and in commercials, going out onto the street, you see advertisements for like Instagram and stuff.
In the past, the website and the internet was very decentralized. You had a million different blogs, forums, chat rooms, etc. There was no one website where everybody got all of their content from. And it prevents new users from finding different websites because they just don't even think to look beyond the default. The online entertainment standards, the preferences, and the expectations of kids today have also changed following the advancements in technology as well. Kids today are on average more easily distracted and bored by activities compared to past years. What does this mean? This means that more is demanded to maintain their attention than used to be during the height of these online virtual worlds. Researcher Dr. Gloria Mark observed a 64% decrease in attention span in just over a decade. She ended up finding out that the average attention span of 2.5 minutes in 2004 declined to just 47 seconds in 2016. The activities within the early 2000s kid spaces were very simple and one-dimensional compared to other media. Most of these virtual worlds had simple visuals and they followed a singular linear storyline or a singular objective. And in truth, these types of games now have a higher likelihood of new users quickly growing disinterested in playing than otherwise would have been during Web 1.0. And lastly, there's an interesting theory that I think might be contributing to this. Mainly, there's been a noticeable shift away from anything that is juvenile amongst younger generations. Now, I couldn't really find any concrete evidence or studies on this to back this up, so this is all just theoretical. Take this one with a grain of salt. Age compression. In short, age compression argues that the average age and the average time that kids take to outgrow kids' media has drastically shortened.
A result of a social phenomenon called age compression, the theory that our children are growing up faster and demanding adult products sooner than ever before. ABC's Andrea Canning has more now.
The habits, the style, the pop culture, the slang, all of these different mannerisms of children, they have grown to more closely mirror that of teenagers and young adults through what is called observational behavioral modeling. Age compression is evident in many different consumer changes over time. Many previously teenager and young adult-oriented brands have observed this interest of preteens, and they began marketing towards them in order to try and get their business. On the contrary, products that were originally made for children have suffered major declines and just a loss of business. Kids television shows like the Disney Channel, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, preteen clothing stores like Justice and Claire's have gone bankrupt multiple times. Even the toy industry has been put under stress due to age compression and a dwindling audience for their supplies. Another factor affecting the children's internet is that a lot of these websites themselves are simply growing technologically obsolete. First, there's the mobile screen takeover. Many websites suffered really shortly after the first iPhone completely took over consumer devices. The touchscreen on the iPhone allowed for an easy, user-friendly internet browsing experience, and it was infinitely more convenient than a desktop. America's gradual adoption of smartphones as the primary screen eventually surpassed the once primary computer, and it eventually pushed the computer back to be a secondary screen within American life. Phones became the primary method of internet usage. Why is this problematic for kids' websites? Because most of which were made before the adoption of touchscreens. Vast majority of these browser games were not made for mobile screens or mobile gameplay. If the iPhone has taken over as the primary screen, what does this mean? That means less time using the computer equals less time playing computer games. By far, the most detrimental example of technology becoming obsolete was the discontinuation of the Adobe Flash Player. Adobe Flash was a browser plugin that let websites run interactive content that normal HTML just couldn't handle at the time. What this means is that it allowed for clickable sections, interactive buttons, animated graphics, etc. Every other foundation foundational element of these kids' websites. It was used basically everywhere all the time on the web 1.0, especially in this ecosystem. Flash games literally ran the children's website ecosystem. Adobe announced it was not only discontinuing Adobe Flash, but it was ending functionality of all the websites created with Flash, which at that time amounted to 2% of every single website on the entire internet. That's 2% of the internet just breaking overnight. After it was discontinued, a lot of the virtual Flash games and all of the Flash worlds, they just stopped working and they died overnight. Unless somebody remade it without using Flash, they just never came back. The final nail in the coffin of our childhood memories can be attributed to none other than money, more specifically the lack of it. When the internet first became widespread, a lot of legislation across the Americas and then the EU passed regarding the online safety of children. That includes laws like Protecting the Children in the 21st Century Act, the General Data Protection Regulation, Audiovisual Media Services Directive, and the Digital Services Act. But by far the biggest US law passed was the 1998 Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. What this basically did was it heavily restricted companies' collection of children's data. This is so important because data collection is the primary method of monetization of big tech platforms. There's even some claims that data collection makes up to 98% of Facebook's total revenue stream. And all of this data collection of its adult users offers enough money to be able to offer kids content like YouTube Kids. If they have both adult users and kid users, they can monetize off of the adult users, and it doesn't really matter. But if your only users are kids and you have all of this legislation restricting data collection, you're not going to have the same amount of financial breathing room. Once upon a time, these platforms had financially survived by collecting less data and making up for the lost revenue by selling products directly to consumers instead. Everything from in-game purchases, premium tiers of games, merchandise, brand partnerships, etc. However, selling directly to consumers only works as a viable alternative if the player base is large enough to spend enough money. As the users dwindle over the years, so do the sales necessary, resulting in a lot more website shutdowns due to profit loss. But the question ultimately remains, who gives a fuck? Why does this matter? Who cares about the abandoned websites going out of operation? When you eliminate the last few corners of the internet that are made just for kids, children online will naturally gravitate towards social media since it's already just the culturally accepted default. Not only does this rob them of a place to just be amongst just themselves, it also leaves them with all of the negative outcomes associated with early childhood social media use. That includes things like executive function decline, thinning cerebral cortex, diminished attention span, notable drops in memory and vocabulary, increased rates of depression, psychological distress, insomnia, poor academic performance, many other negative effects, all of which strongly correlate to premature social media exposure throughout their early childhood. Also, losing kids' websites strips young internet users of a safe place to learn online independence. A lot of these kids' spaces had a lot of safeguarding that acted as a sort of training wheels so that kids would still be able to play independently while stepping in to stop any potential mistakes that they may make. Some examples of mistakes are like telling people their private information, phone numbers, addresses, their full name, believing false information. All of these are things that young kids are at risk of doing because they just don't know any better. Also more vulnerable for being groomed online and for falling for scams. There's a lot of jokes about people in their childhood saying that they fell for the free Robux scams or the free V-Bucks scams while they were young, and this stuff is much more heavily regulated within children's spaces. In conclusion, the disappearance of these childhood websites, it's not just about nostalgia and wanting to drown myself in the past. Really, why I'm concerned is because it reveals a fundamental change in how and who the internet is built for, and which groups of people just end up becoming afterthoughts after the whole thing is done. Young children are then pushed towards the default social media platform, consuming its content, and then they needlessly suffer the negative ramifications. And all of this is happening while a handful of the biggest corporations grow increasingly centralized. They accumulate more wealth and influence over Americans with less distribution of power through these internet alternative websites. So what can we do to help fix this? There's a ton of preservation efforts for these websites like Flashpoint Archive and the legacy remakes that rely on people's support. Petitions to stop the shutdowns of the remaining sites that are left. And I've also heard that there's lots of solo developers on Reddit that are working on future projects that you can also check out. Beyond that, a free way of helping support these sites is by taking some time and actually playing on the surviving platforms. Ultimately, user activity is what keeps it alive. Honestly, for the sake of the future generations, it's up to us to make sure we aren't the last ones that get to experience these online places.